Your job is done. You are retired. Alright guys, well, we're progressing along with I was about to say reinstalling the automatic transmission in this car, but that's not true because this car's never had an automatic in it. This was a 3-speed manual on the column, and I decided to go ahead and as owner of this vehicle to go ahead and swap this over to automatic transmission because the 3-speed didn't work very well. It had a lot of worn out linkage in it, and it was not synchronized on low gear. So even though it was nice for a conversation piece and to help people take a trip down memory lane, it wasn't very fun to drive this car. So I didn't drive this car very much, just kind of sat around a lot. I just didn't like having to fight with the gear shift and the clutch and trying to steer this manual steering all at the same time. So my grandparents had a car just like this back in the day when I was a kid, and theirs was an automatic, so I wanted an automatic. When I bought this car, it was the only one of these I could find anywhere around here that was running, so I took it as it was. So anyway, I know some of you are discouraged and disappointed and disillusioned and depressed about this 3-speed coming out, but it's out and it's going to stay out. So let me catch you up to speed what's going on here. First thing I did was I loosely laid in my transmission cooler lines. That's the metal tubes you see right there. Those run normally to the radiator. This has provisions for cooler lines in it, but they're never been used because no automatic's been in it. And they lead back to the rear back there with the transmission's going to go. But they're just kind of laying around in there right now. They've got these little brackets up here that hold them together and hold them in place, but we're not going to do that right now because they need to be able to be moved around out of the way. So that's that. The next excuse me, next thing we have to do is we're going to have to install what's called the drive plate or the flex plate. So let's go under here, take a look at things. Okay, here's the rear of the engine, and that's the crankshaft flange right there. You can see you got 6 bolt holes. And with the manual transmission in here, normally you would have the flywheel bolted up there to that. But in this case, since you have an automatic with a torque converter is going to go in, you have to use this guy. This is called the, Mopar calls it the drive plate. I call it the flex plate. Doesn't really matter what you call it, as long as you do what you're supposed to do with it. And it goes up here like that. It fits over the flange of the crankshaft and bolts on. And a couple notes here. That's why it's going to go on there. You can't use the bolts that hold the flywheel on because they're too long. You have to use the proper automatic flex plate bolts, and then you install them and tighten them down to 55 foot-pounds of torque. And I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on that too because this should never have to come off again anytime soon. And this only goes on one way. You can turn this thing around and some of the bolt holes will line up when you do that, but you can kind of look and see that some of them ain't. So right here is the way that it's going to go. So I'm going to bolt that together, and somebody asked me in one of the other videos, they asked me which is easier to deal with, is an automatic or a manual, and clearly that's an automatic because the automatic you only have to do that, and then you have to put the transmission in with the torque converter already in place and bolt it up, and you're basically done with the installation. But you'll have a couple pieces of linkage over there, but the manual transmission comes, first you have to take the drive shaft out, which you do on both those, but then you have to take the transmission off, then you have to take the bell housing off, then you have to take the clutch out and the flywheel out, and then all the linkage has to be got out. So the manual transmission, for being more simple mechanically, it's got a lot more crap that goes along with it that has to be taken off and reinstalled or whatever you're doing. So my vote's for the automatic. You'll notice I've got a stain here on the ground, and I've got a little drip back here. Now you may think at first that that's the rear main seal. It's not the rear main seal in this car. It's the oil pan's leaking just a little bit right there at the rear. It's got a, looks like it's got a rubber seal on it right there. It's wet right there, so that's probably, especially since this engine's sitting kind of leaned downward at the rear, it's probably accentuated that. But here's what I'm going to do about that. Nothing, because it's not a big deal. It doesn't leak much when you drive it, so I'm not going to worry about it. So let me go ahead and get along with bolting this flex plate, drive plate, however you want to call it, in, and we'll do another segment later on something else with this. But here's another note: make sure you install this thing the correct way. You see one side, you can see where the bolts have been tightened down against it. On the other side, the concave side, you can see where the flange of the crankshaft's been against it, so don't mess that up. Don't try to put it on like that. It won't go. So you can be upset if you try to put the transmission in and you can't get it to go in because that thing's on backwards. So, okay, well, that's all I got to show you on this, so I'm going to flip off this camera again. And I don't know, I think I might do another video here in a minute when I get this automatic toted out here. That thing's really heavy. I hate messing with it, but when I get it brought out here, I'm going to show you the torque converter installation on that, because I've done a video before that detailed that, how you get a torque converter in all the way, but probably wouldn't hurt to do that again. So anyway, we'll see you then in that video. Take care. Okie dokie then. One of my next tasks I need to do, once I have this transmission back here in the processing area before it goes in the car, is I have to change these speedometer adapters. This is the one that's in this A904 currently. It's the one off the later model. This is a later model transmission that uses a different way of keeping this all together, which we're not going to use any of this because it doesn't work on this car. But we're going to have to take the one off this A250, which is leaking. But here this one is, and this is the one I have to use because, what is that, grease? I know it bolts on in a different spot, but that doesn't make any difference. This is the one that uses a cable that just screws on right there. You can see that. And that one over there takes the cable that goes all the way through and it's held on with a retaining clip on the inside. We don't want to use that. So here's what you need to know about taking these things in and out and replacing them and changing them, etc., etc., etc. If you'll notice on this adapter, it's got a series of numbers around it. That one there I think says 3238, and that one says something else, 2831 possibly, and there's probably be at least one or two more around there. So does that one. But what this corresponds to is these numbers correspond to the gear ratio in the rear end and the number of teeth on the drive gear. In here it's called a drive gear, speedometer drive gear. So this has to be turned in the correct orientation when you put it back in according to what gear ratio you have. So this car has a 323 rear gear ratio, and the car that came out of has something like a 276. So obviously that's not going to work anyway, so I'm going to take this one out. And here's what you need to know. The way you put this in is, normally, if it's never been apart, or at least if it's back together the right way, then you see there's a, don't mind this, I'm not talking about this notch, this is just for these things here, but you see this notch that's cut into this right here. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, there's a notch there, and then right here there's a raised little bump. This is what they call the six o'clock position. Now that's off a little bit because Chrysler just wasn't that, I guess they weren't that OCD about putting the mark in the right place, but that's correct because no, it's not correct actually. This transmission's been apart. He's got this one out right here. You see that notch right there? That's supposed to be in there. So this thing was put back together slightly off actually. So what you want to do is you want to put it back in This has to go back in with 3238 and that notch facing at the 6 o'clock position on that transmission, just like it is here. If you rotate around some other way, you're going to strip the gear out or it won't even work at all. So that's what you do. You come over here and look at this one. And you look at that one and it's really, really hard to see, but it's got a small notch right here. It's raised up. And that's what you deal with. So that's what we'll do. We'll just swap those over and be glad we did it. So pick up on another part of this. See you then. There you go. It is installed. That's all there is to it. Look at over here. Its transmission was leaking its fluid out, and what was coming out of the top of it looked okay. That didn't look too good. Boy, what was in the bottom of it didn't look good. Look at that. Yucko. Doesn't look good. That's got material in it. Like, I don't know what that is, but that's probably synchronizer material and some other stuff in there that's not good. So, like I said, this transmission's been overhauled, obviously, because it's got my old nemesis here. Blue glue. The whole thing is put together. That dog's got diabetes, by the way. Blue glue. Blue glue. So the whole transmission, I don't know what she did to it. Maybe she got mad at it and just tried to jam it in low gear and tore it up. Yeah, that poor dog over there, it's about 12 years old and it's got, like Wilford Brimley says, diabetes. And he gets the shakes every once in a while. Taking a big dump over there, that's real nice. Don't need to show you that. Alright, well anyway, maybe that dog should get its testing supplies from Liberty Home Medical. It'll help it live a better life, you know. Okay, well, scrap metal. Here comes the time I've been looking forward to. That is time to get this thing in position and get it on the jack and see if we can get it in there. I'm not going to film trying to do that because there'll probably be a, if it's like any other time, there'll probably be a string of obscenities and profanity, so I don't want you to have to hear that. So I'll just do this off the camera until I get to a safe zone. So, okay, onward. Alright, in this step we're going to have to put in that torque converter, so I'm going to set you down and we're going to see if we can feel and hear our two clunks that we're looking for. Let's see if I can get you in a good spot here. The torque converter is not light either. Pre-lube the torque converter hub where it goes in so it won't run the seal dry. Hopefully. One, two, there you go. Actually, you can pause it. Yep, okay, all right. You can actually see how far, when you look here, how far in the converter is sitting in. It's recessed into the transmission, and when I turn it, it actually is so far in. It's too far in, and that's okay. It doesn't matter at this point, but you can hear it kind of hitting the transmission housing back there. So that tells you that you've got it in all the way. That's what she said. And anyway, so you want to be careful when you're horsing this transmission around to get it put in, that you don't let that thing come too far forward. You may have to, you know, just check it again as you go up with it, up there with it, to make sure it doesn't come too far forward, because otherwise you can't get the transmission to bolt up all the way. Now you guys with the lifts and the transmission jacks and hoists and all that good stuff, you don't have to worry about this part, but us regular folks have to do it the hard way. Okay, wish me luck. This has to go there. Yay. Alright, back in a bit. Alrighty then, this is what I've rigged up to hopefully facilitate getting this transmission up on the jack without me having to try to force it up there by hand and potentially have it roll off of there and crush my hand or fingers or something else. So I got my two, these are actually tie-down straps, but they work pretty good as come-alongs. You don't have too heavy of a load. So I've just strapped those to both sides of the transmission, and I have some blocks and my big piece of wood. So hopefully here in a little bit I'll be able to slide that thing up on that board there, and that's what will be, have it ready to go in a position to go in. So normally that board won't be jacked up that far on this end, but I want to have it under so it doesn't catch the transmission pan. So we'll see if this works. Like that, worked out pretty well. So it's getting late and the sun's starting to go down, so this is going to be the stopping point for today. So it's in a good spot. It's kind of up against the engine. It's a little bit further up, too far forward. As you can see there, it's just right up against it. So that's okay, because that'll keep it from, you know, rocking around, possibly falling off that jack. And what my plan is going to be is I'm going to kind of finagle it around a little bit, and I'm going to use my jack stand. I'm going to put it under the, I'm going to move those blocks out, and I'm going to put it under the tail shaft of the transmission, and I'm going to use that as like a balancing point. So in other words, it can lay there, and then when I jack up on the transmission, I'll reposition that a little bit. It will hopefully start to position the transmission up at an angle to match the car. Normally I put the car up on four ramps, but I don't have 4 ramps right now, so just got to do what I got to do. But we'll get there. I'm just taking my time and not trying to rush it, because you can cause yourself injury before you know it, especially when you're working here by yourself. So you don't ever want to be under a transmission or anything like that. If it starts to roll, just let it go, you know. Pick it up and start over again. I've had to, that said, I've had to be under a Chevy pickup and essentially had the transmission laying on me and muscled it up into position, and I don't recommend that for anybody. So, all right guys, well, I'll add into this, and it won't take y'all but just a second. You'll see the rest of it, but for me it'll be probably tomorrow afternoon. So the old canopy, this canopy top, just looking at this thing, it's got a 1-year warranty on it. You can see it's starting to fray right here. So otherwise it's holding up pretty good. I don't know if it'd be worth my time to use my Gorilla Tape along the side of this, or just don't worry about it, because I've got 1.5 years out of it so far. So there goes the old leaf blower. Okay, well, enough yakking. I'll see you in the next clip.